Hi, my name is Marya and I'm a mobile app developer, and I'm working together with JB Rainsberger here to build him a mobile app that will record his bowling practice sessions. And so we've been working with Bolt, an LLM that purports to just build whatever you want in no time. So we're in the progress of making that app. It's sort of a mixed bag, I'd say, right? I mean, you're using it, right, JB? So
Yeah,
that
so far generally so good, but part of this is to try to see what some of the specific edge cases are, some of the specific areas where things might fall a little bit apart.
yeah,
Not
we're
because I want to
pushing.
prove that these things are terrible, but because I want to be I'd like to have a more realistic view of what's going on, and so we're going to try to push the envelope a little bit today.
Push the envelope, exactly. So we're kind of
Yeah.
now pushing things a little further. In our previous sessions, we'd had a practice screen where you could add particular throws, the outcomes of particular throws that you've made.
Yep.
You can see that here. If you want to just demo that, like you'd start a session,
Yeah, so
you'd
yeah,
start
exactly. So a
bowling.
practice session is there are buttons here which because of the preview are not easy to see, but
Yeah,
you can record throwing the ball and getting results from throwing the ball. You can even
right.
undo and redo and then press end, and that session now goes into the session history. And the history is we can at least scroll there and you can see all the practice sessions from the past. And so the idea is to be able to do that and then eventually export the results so that I can do some analysis in, say, a spreadsheet or something like that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that you'd like to add, which I guess to be fair to Bolt, we didn't specify this to begin with, and that's why it's not
Right,
there.
right.
If you were to start a session and maybe like say like, oh, I don't actually want that, you'd like to be able to just discard it using a little
Right.
discard button here. So that's what
Yeah,
we're interested in adding next.
right. And for now, I mean, we could just end and then go and delete it from the list, but of course, it'd be nice to have this as a little affordance here. So, the good news is this is relatively low stakes. If Bolt fails miserably, or if we don't do a good job of explaining what's going on, no big deal. I can always just end and then go over to the history, go to the top, delete it, and it'll be
Yeah.
gone. At least it would be gone if we could confirm the alert dialog that, as we've mentioned a few
Yes.
times now, the Stack Blitz preview doesn't seem to allow us to see, at least not on Chrome on Linux. So we'll try to figure that out. But I think one of the ideas that we had today was not merely just to ask Bolt to build it, but maybe to do a little experiment in the direction of test first programming or even test driven development, just to see what would happen.
Right. So,
And
in our
yeah,
last session, we had actually made some changes, and I was saying, to JB, wow, I start to feel nervous when I'm making these kind of code changes myself, and I can't rerun a test periodically.
yes.
And so,
And that, yeah,
that
that
would
was
be
the
nice.
first time that we started changing code on our own rather than asking Bolt to do it.
Yeah,
Or at least that we were really looking through the code rather than treating the code as kind of a black box that Bolt has total control over. So
right.
at some point, we are going to need to think about the transition away from Bolt doing most of the driving or the LLM doing most of the driving to sort of us doing more of the driving and directing and giving the LLM smaller, more targeted tasks to do. So
Yeah.
we'll let's see what happens when we try to do that here today.
Okay.
So the idea that I have, just to sketch out the feature, um, of course, my test-driven development mind starts to think of examples right away. And as I was sort of going through that in my head, I realized that, of course, one of the first things you'll notice when you think of adding a discard button is that's going to throw information away. And so it'd be nice to be able to recover that.
Right.
Um, at the same time, we know that StackBlitz has this behavior that we haven't quite figured out yet, where we can't see alert dialogues. And we know that Bolt is probably going to generate code that has an alert dialog. So
Yeah.
maybe we want to avoid that. So instead of confirm, how about undo? So what I have in mind is a discard button that when you press it, throws the active practice session in progress away, but then turns that into a restore button and you can get it back.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go any more complicated than that. No, none of this like forever restore stack or any of that kind of stuff. There's just one. If you discard, you can restore, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's plenty good enough. I almost can't imagine wanting to restore the session anyway. That's just there to protect against me accidentally pressing
Right. Yeah.
the wrong button during a practice. And I do want to mention, even today, again, I use this app to track a practice session. So I have been using it for about a month now as a normal part of my practice. And some of the features now we're at the point where we're suggesting features that have come from, oh, gee, I wish it did this during real life use. So
User feedback.
we're
Very
really,
nice.
yeah, we're actually using real user feedback from real user. Okay, so I think first let's switch into discussion mode so that Bolt doesn't try to generate any code. And I'm just curious to see if we just describe the feature to it and ask it to sketch tests. Like, what does it come up with?
Right.
And in my mind, this is a little bit like asking a junior programmer who maybe has 3 months of experience or has taken one course in test-driven development. Okay, now try to do this on a real feature and let's just see what you do.
Yeah.
So, okay. Uh, I'd like to add a feature, but before you build anything, I'd like you to sketch tests for the purposes of building this feature using test-driven development. Strictly speaking, I would probably actually say test-first programming, but I'm guessing that its training data is expecting to call that test-driven development, that the distinction is not something that it really understands very deeply yet.
Okay.
So uh, here is the feature. Um, While there is an active practice session going on, I'd like to be able to discard that session by pressing a button. This would throw away the active practice session and um, good enough. This would throw away the active practice session. Um, But just in case of a mistake, I need to be able to recover the discarded practice session. Um, uh, let's see, just in case I pressed the wrong button, I need to be able to recover the discarded practice session and continue or resume recording throws into it. Um, please uh, please sketch tests for this new feature without trying to implement anything. Let's see what it does.
All right.
Is it going to compliment me? Am I absolutely right about something?
It
Let's find
absolutely
out.
will think that you're correct to do so. Oh, thinking.
That's a very under promoted first step of test-driven development is just think about what you're doing.
Thinking. Wow.
Um,
Spitting out a bunch of stuff there.
yep. So let's take a look. So, uh, and of course oh, this is an
Excellent
excellent approach to
approach.
building things. Oh, there's the compliment we were looking for. Um, yes, you don't need to tell me about what TDD is about, but that's good. Okay, so here's a sketch test for discard and recover sessions. So first, um, that's interesting. So it has started with something that I'm not sure I would consider its own test. Typically speaking, that's not the way I tend to think, but that's fine. So the first test seems to be, hey, there's a discard button. So I guess this could be interesting because eventually you want the discard button to be only visible when there's an active session and not there otherwise. I don't know if there's any situations where the discard button could be visible but maybe should be disabled. So that's kind of
I
interesting.
feel like
I'll
it
make
should
a
be
mental note of that.
visible. Yeah, like enabled, disabled, grayed out or something rather than go away.
Right, but the way the UI is built is designed right now, when there's no active session, like there's nothing even to press. There's just this big start session button. So there's
Right.
nowhere for the discard session. Discard
Yeah,
button
but
could only be visible when there's a session running anyway.
right,
So
right.
that might or might not be an issue. This is an example of the kind of
I
test
see.
that
Mhm.
a junior programmer would probably suggest. That's like, I'm gonna I'm gonna call the constructor and make sure that the result is not null. Well,
Mhm.
in most languages, that test isn't actually going to tell you anything.
Yeah.
But everybody has to start somewhere. Just because I wouldn't write it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So discarding an active session clears the current session state. So that's interesting that we haven't asked it to, but it's referring to. I can't tell the difference between it's referring to implementation details or it's using that as the only way to refer to the observable behavior on the UI.
Yeah.
Um, so that I'm not really sure what to think about that yet. We'll come back to that when we talk a little bit about under the skin tests. So the UI refers to the initial state, showing the start session button and no active session details are displayed. So that's interesting because the guts of the test don't make direct reference to the session state, but the name that it generated for the test does. And I can't tell whether it means session state in like the generic sense of state
Huh.
or if it's using React lingo the way a
Yeah.
programmer might. If you're going to do end-to-end tests, one of the typical things that we suggest is don't put UI details, especially not UI technology details in there, because that's not how an end user tends to think. Talk about the UI more abstractly or talk about the application more abstractly. Let's see. Discarding a session moves it to recoverable state in storage. So yeah, again, I wonder if it's going to do the same thing. Oh no. So for this test, it's describing the expected outcome in terms of an implementation detail
Hmm.
rather than observable behavior. So one of the things I'm noticing right away is it doesn't seem to have any strategy for it's not trying to describe only observable behavior or only under the skin. It seems to be doing kind of a mishmash of all of them.
Yeah, right.
That might be okay. Um, and let's see, discarding a pause session behaves identically to an active session. Right. So that's nice. I'm sure that if you and I were discussing the feature for more than 2 or 3 minutes and we're actually sketching out some tests on our own, at some point one of us would say, it doesn't matter whether the session's on pause or not.
Right.
Discard just means discard. So that's nice. Um, 4 tests for discarding an active session. So it's done this nice grouping where it's starting with what happens if there's an active session or actually it's saying discarding an active session compared to recovering a discarded session. Okay, so
Okay.
it's grouping by feature essentially. So there's the discard feature, and then there's the rescue or recover feature.
Recover. Yeah.
Is there any for you? Is there any obvious case scenario here missing? So
Mhm.
we only see discard when there is an actual session running. Discard clears the session. Um, this third test is the only one that maybe I'm not sure belongs here, but at least it's sensible. And then it doesn't matter whether the session is paused or not. Okay, nothing to my mind obvious is missing there. That's
Right.
not bad. Anything for you?
No, it seemed reasonable. I
Okay.
just also wanted to comment. I think what you're saying is it does seem to have an interesting kind of combination. It seems to be saying I'm going to look at the UI, but I'm also going to be looking at the underlying details. Kind of like it's
Right.
just when it's testing, it doesn't seem to have any particular um, there's no uniformity in what it's going to be looking for. I
Right.
thought at first maybe it was going to do like snapshot testing, where it'll like print out the result.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what it'll be interesting to see what it does.
Right. And this again, this kind of reflects the whole like this image that keeps coming back in my mind of the LLM like an eager junior programmer. Um, and I'm not trying to disparage junior programmers. It's just sort of like I don't have a strong strategy, so I'm going to try to do I'm going to try to do more instead of less
Hmm.
to make sure that I have my bases covered. So it's a little bit more of a maybe rather than the junior senior distinction, this is more like um, a somewhat, I don't want to say paranoid, but that's the word that keeps coming to my mind. It seems like a little bit more of a paranoid, I'm going to check everything, right? Which is a very common thing that happens with people who don't have a ton of experience practicing test-driven development and they don't have a lot of confidence in their own practice.
Hmm.
The safest thing is just to check everything. About,
Interesting. Yeah.
in the UI, under the skin, in the back end, in the session state. Just if you're not sure, check everything, which is safe but isn't always helpful.
So I have a question now at this point. My
Yes.
my inclination would be just like tell it to implement one of these tests instead of like please don't try to implement everything all at once. It's just like
Right. So this is an area where I have done a little bit of reading and research, and I've watched what other folks have done.
mhm.
And the LLMs, generally speaking, seem to insist on writing all the tests first and then making them pass one by one.
Oh, interesting.
um, which a lot of people in a test-driven development training course, like there's usually one out of 10 to 15 people who will do exactly the same thing unless I tell them otherwise.
Okay.
Um, and so what matters to me is that and I remember I saw a video where they were discussing about using Claude to do TDD. I don't remember the details, but I remember them sort of saying, just go with it. It's actually better for the LLM to generate all the tests up front and then make them pass one by one. I don't remember the details. I'm not going to push it.
Okay.
Um, so I'm curious now to see how it tries to write these tests because, of course, I have no knowledge of how to write tests for a React Native app.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what it's going to do, the difference between like end-to-end tests and under the skin tests. I have no idea how to do automated testing with React Native at all. So
Okay.
let's see what happens. All right. So please generate please write all these tests, but don't write any production code to try to make any of them pass. All right, so I guess there must be some testing stuff. It's going to use Jest.
Yep.
It seems to be a pretty safe, that seems to be like the nobody gets fired for buying IBM choice for
Right. Okay.
JavaScript testing. I like using Zora because it's very lightweight,
Okay.
and it gives me the feeling of being a little bit of an iconoclast, but that's just a personal preference thing. And this is one of the things that's really emerging for me. I've mentioned this before, I think, in these videos that um, I don't necessarily trust the LLM to do things like to show me the right way or a best way to do things. Um, but at least I get to see an example of how to set up a project to use Jest, for example, since that's a pretty popular thing to happen. And if
Yep.
I don't know how to do that, at least I get to see examples of how that works. Um, and that's one of the things that I found really, one of the things that I think I have optimism for with using these tools is exactly for that, is to say, hey, um, add a testing library or build an app in this technology that I'm not familiar with, just to see so that I can get a feeling for sort of how the outside world expects me to do it, so I don't have to learn how to do it step by step from the very beginning. And then I can look at what it did and ask questions like, really? This is how you do it? Wouldn't you rather do that instead? Or is there a way that I could get the same, if I were doing this with JUnit, it would look like this. Is there a way that, is there a library that does it closer to this style?
Yep.
Um, but, if I don't really know what to do, then it would be nice to get, it's nice that I get essentially a customized example as a.
Right. Yeah.
All right, so let's see what it did. So it set up Jest and it created some tests. Um, And interesting. I'm curious to see what that test component looks like. So let's see what it did. So it has created not just end-to-end tests. It looks like it's doing some combination of unit tests and end-to-end tests. So there's
Yeah.
tests for storage, tests for the practice screen component, uh, and
All external
so it
dependencies
it
are
seems to have been taking
from.
entirely a unit testing approach where it's trying to um, test its code in isolation. Uh, so I wonder whether it's doing sort of under the skin testing at the component level and then unit testing behind the components. Or if it's sort of like, one of the very common patterns that we see is that people use the controllers, or in this case, the components, as I'm going to test the entire application under the skin through the components. And the
Mhm.
components become like the facade for the rest of the application, um,
Okay.
which is okay, except that then you have a mishmash of sort of abstract UI testing and any kind of business logic gets thrown in there all together. So I'm curious to see the storage service tests, then I expect to be like really straightforward unit tests. So let's see what we got. And I'll be frank, what I'm expecting is there to be straightforward unit tests that are probably not very complete. Um, and I'm curious what it mocks and what it tests.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so. I think this is the first point when I'm kind of concerned about the output. Like I actually
yeah,
thought looking at the regular, just looking at this the production code, like okay, everything's pretty much fine, we can deal with that. But this worries me because this is the point where you do not want to be trusting the LLM to do the right thing. Like you really need human eyeballs on this to make sure that it's actually writing the test correctly and that you're not just running complete garbage, that's like, oh, green
right.
lights, everything's passing.
But
Well,
that, but exactly, and that's one nice thing about having done this. So yes, and by asking it to write the tests first, we're sort of mitigating that risk to a certain extent because there's no production code yet.
yeah.
But you could imagine asking the LLM to write tests for existing code, and then
Yeah.
yeah, you have no idea why the tests are passing unless you sit and review every single one.
Now I have
And
to go
I'm
through all this code, right?
right.
And then if I told it like, well, we changed the end button to read finish, you're now you're gonna tell the LLM to rewrite the test and just trust
Yes.
that it's doing everything right. I mean, yikes.
Well, and yeah, and this is an area where I'm genuinely concerned because we're moving in the direction of these LLMs generating a bunch of copy and paste duplicated code,
Yeah.
and it can generate it so much more efficiently than humans can.
Yeah.
So, like the point at which the discussion about changing end to finish becomes an argument in a meeting is only going to happen sooner,
Hmm.
right? Part of our jobs as programmers is to make it easier for people to change end to finish when they need
Yeah,
to translate it into
absolutely.
Chinese, to do
Yeah.
whatever they need. Like that's why we've been demanding lots of money over the last several decades. And that's part of the whole like XP agile movement has been we want to make those kinds of changes not cost exorbitant amount of monies. We don't want to design projects into a corner. Or at the very least, we want to fix the problem as soon as we start to notice that we're designing ourselves into a corner so that it doesn't ever hurt very much. And I'm really concerned in general that this is just going to make those discussions painful sooner.
Hmm.
And that people are going to be more disappointed, not less. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, because the other side of that is it doesn't matter if there are 37 copies of it as long as we trust the LLM to change all 37 copies. That remains to be seen. And
Yeah,
if we
so
have all these tests, maybe we can have that confidence. But if the LLM is generating all these tests,
yeah.
who's to say it's generating tests that are actually checking anything?
Exactly. So imagine, you've just had it write out 27 tests, and now I
Yeah.
go through and I look at each one and I'm checking to make sure that's all logical. And then there's a change that's made, and then it completely rewrites the test. And now I got to do all that again. I mean, that's
Yes.
unreasonable.
One of the first questions people ask in a TDD course is, how do I test the tests? And
Yeah.
usually what we tell them is, well, the tests in the production code kind of test each other.
Hmm.
Um, but ultimately, a human judgment, a human's judgment has to be
Using
involved.
your brain. I mean, yeah,
Right,
you can't
exactly.
be on it. It's like,
But if we're going to outsource that to the computer now,
yeah.
then the idea of there being like offsetting mistakes, or the idea that the LLM is only going to generate tests that is only going to generate expectations or assertions that it knows are already going to pass.
Yeah.
Like naive practitioners or practitioners under pressure, humans will
Yeah.
do that. I've done it and I had to discipline myself out of it. But again, the LLM is a hell of a lot more efficient at it than we are. We're going to generate 20 crappy tests in a day. They're going to generate 20,000. And that is where I think I'm really curious to see what ends up happening as a result. If it's, this is one of those directions where I think, the system is going to break down.